So that, and then all of a sudden you see that there may be that what seemed a simple pain or a simple problem or whatever, then, and then you see that to some degree that you've been secretly managing your pain and managing your body. And that something in the medical world interferes with the management if you have to take penicillin for something, or they need you to do this or whatever, because you're trying to live a natural diet or natural life. And you start to see that more and more the medical world is more and more around business and making a buck. And so it's losing that intimacy that you had with a person who was a friend, who happened to be a doctor, and there were honest conversations shared about things. So let's say as you have situations where you've attempted to live as natural life as possible, but then circumstance then draw you into the world in a literal way, where then, oh, by the way, there is Johnny D was sick, apparently this week we heard from Kerry, who's caring for him. And you knew that, Derek, also?
Yeah, I got a text from, Joan got a text from Kerry and she forwarded it to me, so.
Yes, and I've been speaking to Kerry while he's been taking care of John, but that John seems to have had a stroke.
Yeah.
Oh.
And not only a stroke, but he can't speak yet.
Oh.
Although he said that when he was on the phone with me, Kerry was, that John knew that I was on the phone and he was smiling and he was making some hand gestures, but that basically his body didn't come together yet. And that he was going to go into some therapy place.
Yeah.
Rehab.
They're going to keep him in the ICU for a week and then move him to a rehab facility.
Yeah, and then I heard from another fellow who has this, on top of a lung cancer, it was a autoimmune disease that he's receiving this sort of treatment for. They sounded pretty much, but at the same time, it made a new relationship with his daughter.
John.
That big John there, his daughter was a doctor, but I don't know that but it brought them closer together where they're living in the same house there. So at one point you see that what is as coming close to dying is happening. It also brings together a kind of solving of something that you could never say to the person for 30 years, as you said, or whatever. And then just something shifts where you say, "I'm sorry, baby," or you see that you meet your own existence in some way from a different place. And you see then that it was just a human experience that was happening. And it was a hurt in the story. And you see how the body and the brain and the circumstance wraps itself around the hurt, nurtures it, tries to smother it like it's a pain. And somehow it knows what the pain means, but it just puts a Band-Aid on it or it just covers it up or something like that, but it knows that it's a larger pain. So then you see how one held on to it as part of having the experience of releasing it as a possessive. And you saw there was a larger picture happening. And you were one of the actors in the picture. But there was an experience that was because of the situation, relationship, there was an experience through memory entering into each person's individual life, their individual take on the same event becomes their identity to some extent with each other. And it's only in seeing somehow on the other side of the character that "I'm sorry, baby" releases the story from the persona and you see that there was an experience, that somehow you found your way out of something by screwing up. But somehow you had a relationship to something that was true, that when it wasn't true any longer, it was falling apart anyway somehow. And true wasn't spelled out for you, but false was in some way. So let's say that something in you, without over romanticizing it, gave you a life as a thread somehow into the world, but somehow you found your way out of something that was when it started to lose that feeling. And let's say to the larger world, that's a screw up because it interrupts where somehow you see in the larger world, you're supposed to suppress that
Mhm.
or remove it or psychoanalyze it or medicalize it or something like that when a true thing is happening.
Mhm.
And the true thing is happening is that the form continues while the feeling is shifted or lost. So at one point it looks like rehabilitation, but in fact it happens to be a kind of intelligence, the relationship to these feelings. Because somehow when there's shared feelings, it opens up a doorway of sharing something, trying something, where it's kind of one person at times, even in memory or feeling. The person is there when you come home to, or
Mm.
so there is somehow a normalcy in an I and thou relationship
Mm.
when the thou aspect is shifted by even like simple discoveries. You see something hidden, you read a diary, you discover something, and usually comes accidentally. It shifts the plane, but what is actually shifted in the plane is that it's missing a conversation. You understand? And not only is it missing, it's not like a healing because, in one sense, the falling away of the feeling is a healthy thing, not a sickness or an illness or something like that. Um, and so that and treating because there is an involvement in continuing, then you'll see that most situations you'll walk into have this psychological component happening for them, or pressured, or cheating, or a juggling act, or
Yeah.
whatever. And it's normalized because, in fact, it is a way of continuing. Where cheating, in one sense, was a way of continuing the story. And then I read where some rabbi advised the guy, they said, well, what about how do you have 8 babies then? So then he said, you put a picture, you paint a picture of Marilyn Monroe on a sheet, and you put that between you and your wife. You're making love, but in your mind, you're making love to Marilyn Monroe. They say because they feel it's impossible then to have 8 kids together like that. Okay. And,
Yeah.
so there's some who've taken a vow to God or whatever, but that basically, if the person has to have 8 children or something like that, then they have to go through all kinds of psychological stuff in themselves. Because there still is there is still a yearning that comes with the story that is looking for a love in its life, and where it's not only literalized as a literal love, but that there is a conversation with the mystery inside the history. And so one has attempted to live a life that has a kind of purity to it, which purity doesn't mean rules and regulations as it means coming from a kind of genuineness in yourself.
Mhm.
And a genuineness then allowed you to, you meet your being. And part of your being is your body, the hidden body that's hidden from you. not just knowledge that he has kidneys and livers and lungs, but you see a whole cooperative that even in the most simple of act of getting up in the morning, how much the elbows say, okay, knees, you ready? Elbows, okay. Where there is, are you ready to get up now? Or and you see the cooperative that is surely there in the body, in the everyday. So you start to get a glimpse of dimensions happening in your everyday life. And this last year with the virus, there and not there simultaneously, but somehow its there-ness was invisible, where people had to make choices about their everyday. And yet the everyday maintained its everydayness. And it seems now to be that we'll be able to reflect at one point, and especially you, Kai, then how it was then to be in the situation you were in the last year and a half, from the perspective of the journey. So there'll be a place that you're writing from or viewing it from. And it'll clarify something that you've all gone through. And that is
Hey,
not
Urja.
Sorry to
Sorry.
disturb.
Okay. But let's say you'll see almost metaphorically what is kind of hidden in the situation in the moment. But you'll see full on this year and a half, what you've gone through as part of your experience and as part of your journey, that you've just gone through the plague with all that stuff, and you've gone through Trump and this and that. So it's almost as if you were in the 16th century with the Crusades or whatever. People are doing this or that, and you were attempting to live just a clear life, while the world seemed to be caught up in whatever it was caught up in, its own karma, its own history, its own story. You see that you were attempting to have some kind of a genuine life. And you then meet yourself, I think, in time. You'll see this year and a half that you've just gone through on top of what you were already going through, that you enlisted yourself, but then you threw this plague into the story.
As if there wasn't enough.
Well, the plague took away all chances of leaving and going and this and that so easily.
That's true.
Because the plague created a kind of there-ness in your life.
That's true.
So that, and that if you left it, you're involved in that world out there. So somehow, even if it was nuts, there was some agreement between you also that was fighting off the plague by just being who you were with each other.
Yeah.
There was a kind of capacity to hang out with each other. So let's say every one of us will have access to this year and a half that we've just gone through, where we've normalized it, but that somehow we've integrated it into our lives. And the rest of the issues remained. But the underlying premise was somehow the virus changed things.
It did.
It didn't, it made your planning not so literal. I don't know if we can go there, if we can do this, or we can, okay. Because there was a happening out there, whether it was literally happening, what level it was happening, there was a happening out there. And that changed your ability to fly, to drive, to leave, to go, to even find a new situation. So somehow we'll have access to what happened, not as a literal happening, but the world came to resemble more of again, a movie than a literal life, that each person had this larger experience was going on over our head, and each person had their own version of the experience. It's like one of these flying saucer movies, or one of these, uh, these scientific movies that they had a few years ago, where somehow everyone heard the sound and their lives changed, but they were just going on as usual.
Hmm.
But the usual then had a different element running through it. Hmm? And because it was not a permanent usual. It didn't have permanence in it in the same way um, that it did in the past, where you invested it in its continuity and this and that. Somehow the continuity was shaken by certain subtle events that were taking place, meaning they assured you that you have an apartment, Urshan, but all of a sudden you get the virus, and then you may not have an apartment. Maybe checking in on you. Like Jai says, that they're not only checking in on you, but they're also hoping that they can rent your apartment soon. So let's say that the motive comes in the story, where what looks like looking out for you is kind of checking in on their property to see if it'll be vacant soon. You want the job, urgent, and the job will be becoming nothing while you're still alive. But where you have to say, hey, excuse me, and then please, will you leave us alone, this old lady? Get out of here. Or, or you go to the market to buy something and you ask a question, they say, please leave us alone already with these crazy questions. Will you be able to goof with that?
I'm getting used to it.
Yeah, where you're just thought of as an old cranky person who yells at people in French. Why don't you try it for a week?
Being cranky?
Yeah, try being cranky French old lady. There's some movies you can probably see where you can do that. Just walk around as a cranky French old lady and see, just for 1 week, and then return back to Ursha.
Yeah, well, people are going to say, what the who the
So they probably will say, for the first time, what the. So why not? You want to give it a shot? Of course, you're acting now. You're not actually doing it, but you can probably do it pretty easily as an actor. What do you think?
But
In fact,
don't have to warn people.
so let's say as we logically become less, unless you feel to jump into the world and do some skydiving and do some marathon running, or as an 85-year-old will say, a 92-year-old, and it's remarkable or whatever, unless you feel enthused to jump into the marathon world or the extended life world. And I think for $26,000 you can get a new ass and a new nose.
Butt implants.
Just a two-spoon.
5-year guarantee.
And it pops.
A 5-year guarantee. This way you can run right into the world and smell it and jump with it or whatever. Okay. So let's say in our lifetime and in your lifetime, there will be offers. Do you want to jump back into the world with wearing these underwear, or doing this thing, or getting this radiation treatment, or
No.
well, some of them may be appealing, where they're talking about, again, the immune system and non-invasive immune system treatment and this and that. And they make it sound very glamorous. So what do you say? You wouldn't, you're still not into, well, there may be something that touches you where they offer you extended life. Hmm? And being fit and all that sort of thing. And you are into fitness, aren't you?
I'm listening to the bird. You have a
I
bird that
just heard also, yeah. I
what
just heard.
should be heard?
I was just using, to some degree, a bouncing off of you of a mirror effect of what's also seemingly happening for me. You understand, and that is the theory that we're discussing as an immersive, that there's a recognition that dying and living, somehow an event shows you that dying and living are simultaneously happening. And you've taken it for granted in nature, but you see as you walk through the woods or you even all the plants and everything, you see dying and living happening. You see the seasons changing is a version of dying and living. It doesn't mean death. It means a process is taking place of dying and living. And okay, it may mean death in one sense. And they are shouting here, there's going to be a drought that's never been before. And so the water is going. And so they say, if last year you didn't have your computer because, what happens if you turn your tap and there's no water, is what they said in the paper today. So they're talking in those terms out here.
Yikes.
And from what they're hearing, the fires that are going on in the West, yet there's normal living going on everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So then as I'm talking to you about a process that we are actually in, it's maybe our version of that process, but you see a process is taking place in the body and in the life. And that somehow there is a conversation with the outer world that is also taking place in that process. Hmm? And you see, to some degree, you are keeping yourself viable enough to still get on with the situation you're in, the life that you're in. Hmm? So you see that something in your body is also wishing to live.
Yes.
And so then that one that wishes to live starts dancing. Okay. And acts nice to people and says, how are you doing? And grows vegetables. And so then you see that somehow they are extending their life by kind of creating natural interest. And natural interest is also where they're creating the possibility of interacting with others in a soulful way. Where there's very little barriers to whatever the history of the person, the similarity of their circumstance kind of brings them into a collective moment. So they're all dancing together, square dancing in the nursing home or whatever they're doing. But there's a moment where they're meeting each other, they're doing this, and whether the person was a banker or a beggar or whatever, it's all nullified in the schmaltz of the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a premise in the schmaltz of the moment being a kind of extended life. Not only the life of earning a living and having a future or this or that, but a kind of friendship life
Yeah. Yes.
that has the similar conversations, not only about not literalizing dying and living, but it kind of recognizes that its connection to each other is that it is in fact dying and living. And so they're doing square dancing in an old age home. Because, okay, so then they, however goofy it is, you see the fun that they may be having. And the fun is kind of, and it seemed like the fun that they're having was more important than all the ambition that they've had growing up in their life or whatever. Because they are inventing a situation
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet there is a cognition that dying and living is happening. And to some extent, life is related to living for something. And then if in fact there is a presumption that you are now living for something, even if it's to dance, then there may be an exercise that you do so that you can dance, or there may be some interesting, you may learn a language so that you can familiarize yourself with certain expressions, or that Spiro says that he's studying Sanskrit,
Yeah.
as an energy or something, that they have a class in Sanskrit. Oh, is that Reed there? Oh, that's Carrie.
Here.
Are you in a car, Carrie?
Hey, yeah,
Yeah, what kind of car? It looks like you're in heaven.
it's a CRZ. It's like a little sporty hybrid car.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, but it looks like a heavenly sort of experience.
Because
Like
of
that
the
guy, what's his name? The fellow who had the space flight the other day. He was. It has a little bit of a look like that. How are you doing? How is John doing?
It's John is. I haven't seen him today. It's been really challenging. I'm kind of facing different challenges right now because I may have been exposed. I have my shots, but two people at my recording studio got COVID, and I'm having a really bad headache today. So I decided to not go in, just because John hasn't gotten vaccinated, and I don't want to put anybody at risk.
Yeah.
But there's just kind of systems and dilemmas coming up that are kind of getting in the way of the human. Around legally, they want to get in touch with his family who he hasn't talked to in years, and I'm not sure if that's going to make any issues as far as visitation or just being able to be in contact. But yeah, it's been challenging.
So you mean if they force people who purposely haven't talked to each other, and then they say, okay, you better come because he's pretty sick.
Yeah, or at least,
will they say, oh no, of course that's my dad, or will they say, that dirty mother jumper, I'm gonna choke the shit out of him if I come out there, or are they gonna say, what the hell, am I crazy? That's my papa that's there. Let me give him a kiss or something. So you say
yeah.
What's the odds for that to happen? A complete awakening to the other's mutual humanity. Lots of luck.
Right.
You can try to stage it. You can maybe order pizza for everyone when they get together or something, and have some angels and do some Bible recitations and maybe sing a few songs. Do you think that's going to get it together? Maybe if you order pizza.
Yeah, pizza.
They may not need you. They may just need somebody to order pizza or a vegetarian pizza or something for them there. Okay. So let's say what is being orchestrated here is that if in fact they want family there, then they think that it may be in a pretty up in the air situation. And so then legally the family has a responsibility that you don't have. Your kind of responsibility is friendship, to see a kind of human
Right.
thing. Okay. But then there are
Yeah.
little people, whether they like it or not, that have to cover your funeral, that have to pay for it because they are relatives. I think.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you step into a literal world, even though you see that literal world has been fractured for a long time and the people don't really get along with each other in the lodge.
Yeah.
Yet this situation is bringing them together by law, by pushing you out of the way to some degree and say, thanks for your help, it's very nice and everything, but we need a legal person.
Yeah.
And a legal person is indicative that there may be some tough decisions. Now, Kai, would you want someone making a tough decision for you who hasn't spoken to you in 40 years?
No, definitely not.
They say,
I
okay,
would want
give it.
someone like you making the
No, no, they say no. They say, should we put this in the eye and the nose and up the cooler? They say, no, no, don't do that. But if I want to get even with the person, I said, yeah, do that to him. So I say, could we be such a stupid, could we understand a movie like that? And you say, hold it, let's understand that there is spite that runs through the story. And like that book Spite tells you that they say that because Bernie didn't win and Hillary did, that they voted for Trump out of spite. Most of the Bernie people, and they say that spite runs through the whole history, and through every family, and this and that. Some things are done out of spite. Meaning you're sending a message. Yeah. So that you wouldn't have done if the feeling was there or something was shared was there. But what would spite be? That's a nice mustache for a face like you have. So that would be a way of, like, traditionally saying it's a nice mustache, but putting you down in another way, but hiding it. Okay. So let's say that must run through every family kind of situation where there is a kind of, not a kind of romantic put down in a kidding around form. But in fact, you can see where spite can be really mean. And then spite can even be immoral and whatever level it goes on. But you do see a story going on. So let's say you're the medium that the kids of John would find it extremely difficult to just be doing what you're doing. And yet you're doing it out of friendship. So you see the thing that's missing in the family structure is what you're having normally. Where you're figuring out, can I do my day and get over there in time and I see this? And so you see that you're doing this whole crazy quilt where you don't have to literally.
Right.
But they have to legally. But you're assuming something that okay. So you see that all they had to do was think like you're thinking.
Yeah.
And yet you see how many light years it is away from naturalizing. How can they manage their day so they can take care of their pop? And so you think you're assuming something that's inherently missing in the story, but is there in the friendship. And that somehow they would have to be concerned. And somehow the break allows them not to be concerned. About what happens to the person and the fate of the person until something is happening to the person. And then it brings you into the situation around concern that has kind of been missing in the story all along. So it's good to see it. It's good to see the undercurrents that run through our life. And it's good to see that there is there's a naturalness that's there in the friendship. That if in fact it goes, if it's lost, then the need is also lost. That somehow it is based on a reality. There's a genuine But if the person somehow says to you, get lost, mother jumper, well, that's a tough one.
Right.
Because let's say that you're coming then close to seeing what the person is alone with.
Hmm.
And you see from the
Yeah.
perspective that they're in, living and dying is happening in the moment. And as they're looking out into the story, they're looking out into the story of people who are measuring how much they're living and how much they're dying. So, in one sense, that's the sole occupation for everybody involved with you. And that is thrust upon you that the sole occupation for you is not the story that you're in, but the story that you're in is living and dying and is in a bed with people who are examining what extent you're living and what extent you're dying. So I would say that you're seeing the world from a very interesting place.
True.
Because then you're attempting to, my feeling is that John would start to teach them some music lessons.
Right.
It's like, he would try to go, he would try to, whatever he could do to make some sound so that they would be interested in what he does and what he's
I think
doing.
he was making some rhythms with his right hand yesterday when I played him some of the music he suggested.
So I'm just I put myself in John's body for a minute. And I said, okay, I would start trying to introduce somehow music into the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even if I'm rolling over, I'm going, read about just
Yeah.
somehow bring music into the picture, and that there'll be somebody who will hear it, a nurse or whatever, who will pick up on it, who will look out for you. So he is expert in finding the one person out of 100 who will look out for you and come in and give a little tea or rub down or say, how you doing, baby, while you're in this weird scene.
Yeah.
So let's say you're providing also some measure of how you're doing, baby, although you were breaking up just before this happened, so that entered into the story. So boy, you got a complex orchestra between yourselves, And so
Sure.
So let's say just in normal conversations, as I'm having a normal conversation is about living and dying. Let's say in our normal conversations, it may sometimes create a kind of introspective between you all. And you come up with say, hey, this is not a job of mine taking care of you. If it is a job, it becomes like a literal marriage where you have to do it. And they say, no, our marriage is that you're doing it because you wish to, because it's a good thing. But if you're starting to get a vibe that it's a literal job, it's because you're starting to get ordered around in a way that it is a literal job. And so when it over literalizes, when the money becomes more important and this, and you say, no, hold it. So then that's your measure creatively that somehow you're managing the money, but the money is an aspect of the thing. When the money is in fact the focal point, then it kind of conspires. And I say, what does conspire? Whenever you have to be a sneaky about something, then there's going to be a moment when they say, aren't you the guy who was collecting money like 20 years from now? Say this, Steve or something. I say, no, hold it. But somehow there's a relationship that's pure. Then it has logical things that you have to do from Social Security and this and that while you're helping the person out. But when in fact becomes dominated around the Social Security and the circumstance like that, when it was a friendly, then there's going to be some issues. There's going to be some issues that then come up, which is again the hey baby conversation. Hey, are you still into it? Because the seasons have changed or the structure has changed. And somehow it's not automatic for us to go into an automatic situation that's based on friendship. I'll get rid of you for a moment and
Is
go
that
back over.
inherent?
No, I'm just seeing something
Is that
myself.
inherent in all relationships?
Excuse me?
Oh, I was just asking if that's inherent in like having seasons, having birth and death. Is that inherent in every relationship, or is there any relationships that kind of
No,
transcend that?
let's say when the love affair literalizes, then when it literalizes, what was given to you naturally, just out of a feeling,
Hmm.
it starts to normalize. Where once it excited you, once you came running home to it, once you had it in your memory, it
Yeah.
existed. It existed. So then, as its existence has a continue, it becomes normalcy. So as it becomes normalcy and it literalizes, it loses the thread that first gave it. That would be a normal thing. So you see what is happening. It's forcing a conversation. And why? By an incident, because the need to have that feeling is still there. And so part of the brain or part of the being is still looking for that or has a hope of that. And it's carrying on with something out of courtesy to the situation, fear of not having a place, with all the reasons that keep something going when it's lost its thread. Or that you have made a life together so you can't just exit it. So there's the logic of a circumstance that didn't need logic before that. Because it wasn't logical, the attraction of the people allowed a reality to happen. But as the reality became the literalness of the story and preserving the reality, you could see the naturalness that will happen. So there will be a moment where you see it's avoiding a hey baby conversation. And so you see that you and John had came to close to a hey baby conversation. We're getting caught up in the story. So you then were an actual nurse, except you're not a nurse. You would be the least nurse in the world to hire. And they said, let's hire a nurse. They say, Kerry, let's hire Kerry. Right. So I don't think he would be that good as a nurse. What do you think, Urja? Would you like him as a nurse?
No.
Oh,
No,
I
thank
don't, I
you.
don't
Catch
know.
you later. Okay. So somehow your heart has to be in it. And then you can assume the identity of the situation. But if investigators came over,
Right.
they would find out in 20 seconds that you're not really a nurse, that you're Kerry doing nurse.
Right.
So if there's a holy shit moment, Kerry would say, holy shit, and I have to call a literal nurse into the story, because there is a legal option where you say, let the doctor try to bring the person back if you can. Okay. So you see that friendship has allowed you to assume a kind of reality. But you also saw to some degree that an issue that was happening for you, and it was real enough, is that it was becoming a job. And then if it becomes a job, then the person you're caring for starts to say, hey, you came late today. You owe me 2 more hours tomorrow, then hold it. Wait a second.
Yeah.
There's an agreement between us. I can come in or not come in. Do you really need me or whatever? And they say, no, you got to come in. And so then you say, well, hold it. It's something is literalizing. Now I may have to look at a situation if the fears are happening in the person.
Yeah.
Where they somehow know that Kerry is going to get caught up in his situation. He's going to be leaving me soon.
Mm.
Where you're going to say, then, I can't come today to help you out of bed because I'm having an argument with my girlfriend.
Yeah.
And I was going to ask you for help. Why are you trying to get out of bed? Can you help me with my girlfriend? And he's gonna go, but you don't see what situation that he's in.
Mm.
So then they'll have to order you around. And so then you'll see that all the situations that you've been in, that as it goes to that flux, they start trying to order you around. And ordering you around means that you owe me. And you owe me a kind of behavior, not only 3 months rent or something like that do you owe me, but you owe me a kind of behavior
Right.
that's based on owe me. And it comes very much like you say, okay, how much is owe me is 3 months then? Do I have to do this? Or
Undefined.
let's literalize owe me. How much is owe me time then? I owe you for something that we're no longer into.
Yeah, it feels indefinite.
So 3 months seems like an okay agreement to get this act together and everything. You know.
Right.
So what a missing conversation. It seems that, let's say, the conversation that comes with the dissolution of the feeling and the form is dissolving, but then there is an omi, and it's not just a contract to a landlord. That if you read it, you see that you do owe them, but you really don't owe them. It's really stupid that you gave away a year of your future without knowing what it was going to be. But then you have to live a false situation or something for a year. Okay. So let's say you then run into the signing of the document. But then you also find a different kind of omi.
Yeah.
Is that when you pull a plug on the situation, it leaves a hole in the story where it interrupts where the continuity was the big thing. Now the continuity is just, okay, we'll take 3 months or 5 to do this together to make sure that whatever the issues are. And that agreement comes more from a kind of friendship over something you've shared. Now you see lots of luck. So they say, well, how close can one stumble upon it being a shared experience consciously? And you have that agreement about the story. You say, well, lots of luck. That's usually a retrospective, just like this last year and a half. You see how much the virus is not the literal virus, but somehow something happening in the world has also entered into your life and made it normal, that we've just gone through an epidemic and relationships and circumstance and this and that. And somehow it's profoundly shifted the time of it. And somehow we're in July of 2021. And somehow there was a Trump who was president for a couple of years that we were just in, and now there's a Biden who's a president, and they're yelling at him for this and that, and there's a surge. And so let's say as you walk past the news, it leaves like a little shadow impression on you of happenings that are going on around you. And you see that the world is in flux. While it has a day-to-day normalcy, somehow the natural patterns of existence are also shifting. And as you look at the news and you look at the entertainment, you see also, and then you read in the paper that the white population is now no longer the majority. And so then you say, holy shit. So you see then that the majority always ruled in some way in all these countries. But as they were no longer the majority, you saw that history then pushed their systems aside. And so then you start to see evidence of these changes or shifts taking place, the literal shifts. You see evidence of it. That the world is in flux, that the life is in flux. At the same time that they're attempting to have a continuity, at the same time it's up in the air. And you see, to some degree, your actions are representing something that is actually happening out there creatively. Where it's not a literal situation at this point in time. It is that everyone's life more resembles a movie circumstance than a movie, meaning that the future wasn't laid out supposedly to the person. They accidentally discovered something, fell in love, but they always engineer in the movie that something happens that shifts the plane or shifts the picture. So let's say one will have a perspective of this year that they've gone through, the situation that you've gone through simply with John, and in your own circumstance where the feeling has shifted or whatever, and are you free to fall in love? And you may find you're not free to fall in love. And that was a question, I think, when I went up to Stevens in Colorado. And there was a couple, were they free to fall in love? And they said, well, who would jump out the window? Who would curse them? Who would? And I said, that may all be valid, but still, are they free to fall in love? What's this they're going to do if they have to sneak out of the bathroom window? But do they have to sneak out of the bathroom window? Are they free to fall in love, no matter whether you're hurt, whether you're this? So it was a kind of examination of a ripple effect. Where hurt was not some bad thing that was happening. Hurt was kind of evidence that there was a true feeling to some degree that ran through the story. If hurt becomes hate and then it becomes possessed, but if the hurt has its elements of experience, but there was a hurt to some degree because there was a truth that ran through the story. You measure the degree of hurt that happens. And then you see if the hurt is irrational, then it's coming from a different place. And that means that the person may still think of you, dream of you, okay, so that you are also a dream, a memory, all of these things. And somehow you intuit that you are responsible for a memory of you to some degree.
What does that mean?
That somehow you wouldn't want to be known as a real rat
Oh,
out there.
yeah, of course.
Then if you say, okay, then that would kind of mean that you aren't a rat. Okay.
Right.
Because if you are a rat, you're going to probably be known as being a rat. So they say, yeah, but can the person then be a rat to me? I say, if you're not a rat fully yourself, then the person will kind of be embarrassed at times if they have to be a rat to get what they want. So let's say as you surrender ratness as a technique for yourself, you also diminish the other's capacity for ratness to a very few exchanges, more like what we were talking about as spite, where you'll be hurt by something, you'll be reminded of something. Or you'll see that someone gives away something that was given to you as a gift and they just gave it away to somebody. And you see like there was a move or a hurt or a spite hidden. That was, and they say, oh yeah, I forgot I gave that to you, and, okay. So you start to see it's poetry, but it doesn't experience that as poetry. But in retrospect, you'll see the whole movie that you were in. That became normal. And that's why I say in retrospect, and retrospect means that you don't own the story in some way. And you start to see from a perspective where your life, in fact, has been a creative life and it's interacted creatively. And you see this whole dimension of what you've done as a normalcy. Where you've just done a normal year and a half. And yet, if you read a novel of the life that you've just lived in a year and a half, it would be extremely interesting to visit that person
Mm-hmm.
and see what they were experiencing in their normalcy. When in fact it looked like a normalcy, but in fact the world was going through supposedly a turmoil, not only politically, structurally, epidemically, but supposedly everything was up in the air. And identities and structures, and so let's say we lived through an experience in a kind of normalcy. But you see, in that normalcy, the things shifting, circumstance reformulating, the businesses were no longer a business, the friendships shifted in a different way, and you saw then that it was never really a business, it was friendships doing some weird stuff together, just keeping it together, but it never had the fierceness of a business of fighting for it. Yeah. So you see, it was our creation, and without a kind of feeling running through it, it becomes, it becomes clunky. When it becomes clunky, you see that the creative shift has taken place. So then every now and then there is a, hey baby, are you still into it? So then let's see, even come to a situation without there being so much where who will get vaccinated, who won't get vaccinated. Everyone's vibing their own situation. If they're going to be in the public and they have to do this and how they manage their lifestyle and others will. So you see there's a cooperation where you ask God, should I get vaccinated? God says, I don't give a shit if you get vaccinated. That's your call, baby. Leave me out of this. Leave me out of this weird conversation. I don't know. Sometimes you feel like it. Sometimes you don't feel like it. I think that's the way I would be, God says. So God says, I don't think I would, and I don't think I wouldn't. Okay. And so they said, because it doesn't matter to God if it's would or wouldn't. It matters that somehow it comes from a place. And even if that place is wishful thinking or magical thinking is a very important force in the world. It's not stupid thinking. So magical thinking has this idea that you're kind of having a conversation with God or that world or something. As a naive kid would speak to Jesus with his fingers crossed or something like that. And so you see there would be a kind of honesty in the romanticness of it that couldn't be shared literally with most folks that you would know, but that some friendships resemble the kind of spiritual thing in terms of their capacity to, and not spiritual woo with all the ceremony, but spiritual where in that relationship you located something in yourself. And that you came from that place in yourself into the situation. So coming from that place into a situation is considered naive because there's a feeling that opens up a doorway of possibilities. And so then you see that at the same time, that feeling shifting is also then scatters the thing that was created by the feeling. And so it creates a hurt within the people because a change of feeling has also been a change of structure that they're in. And that change of structure, then sometimes it depends on how if it's a hey baby change of structure, which is rare, then it's you mother jumper change of structure. You little rat bastard, you did this to me and you did that to me. So then somehow it has to be fierce in order to The fiercer it is, the more evidence that there was a true love that ran through it, but it's also a violation of what you've shared. So you see it has a border. The reaction has a border to the responses, you would say, is that there's a recognition that there's a love that goes on while the form is changed. And in fact, it is even a more reformed love because it's the love of memory.
Mm-hmm.
And it resembles like a love of someone who's passed away or something, where you forgive the story to a feeling. So there are moments when a simple feeling relieves the situation from the literal story that it was in. And I
Yeah.
can say, bye, mom, take it easy.
Mm.
Without a memory of mom being this or that, or she did this or that, where all of it becomes a movie that we share.
Yeah.
And a goof. So you see when, but it can only be released when one is pretty close to a human experience in themselves. It's privileged information that this has been a creative existence where you are a participant in it, but not the owner of the story. So the owner of the story wants to know through Buddhism, through Christianity, what is going on, but it's still a possessor. But it resembles more the mirror looking into the story where there is no literal history. One came and lived through a mystery. And it took many shapes, but the thread was there throughout the story. So I think it resembles more as if you have 5 or 10 movies that you've made of your life, where the thread of you runs through the story, but the story shifts. And you see that at the same time there was a literal story of you. There have been corresponding stories of you that have been more creative acts or invisible acts or coming from different places inside yourself. And so then you also can see, you can visit the moments where you have had accidents that change the picture for you. So let's say Kerry could not have gotten back easily into the picture with John after the work incident. All John had to do was have a stroke, and then Kerry forgets the work incident or whatever, and he then flies down there as the only one who's really there for the moment. Okay. So he was the guy who was just fired.
Mm.
And the guy who was just fired then somehow comes back into it. That's pretty weird, isn't it, Kerry?
That
Did
is.
they fake? Did you get paid? Were you
I
faked
just
out?
got a call from them, so I'm gonna come back to you guys.
Yeah. That's good. We'll see you soon. So isn't that strange that the very thing where there is what appears to be a corresponding remember when we said that he took the vaccine so that John didn't have to take the vaccine? And it was a kind of affectionate act where people make a decision that they may not have made themselves, but they make in relationship to something else. And then the job literalizes and it breaks up the relationship. And then all of a sudden, there is a stroke that happens or some kind of maddening thing that they find out is a stroke afterwards. And somehow that calls you completely in the picture, even more than family and circumstance or whatever. The people who just broke up with each other then find themselves thrown into an affectionate situation again.
Yeah.
And it does seem that dying takes away the past in some way.
Yeah.
And it kind of reduces it more to a feeling that you're having.
Mm-hmm.
And that feeling then compels your action. If the feeling is strong, then you may need to be there. If the feeling is somewhat strong, you may need to change your mind about what happened. or introspect, where you release the person from the story that they're in because somehow you recognize the story they were in. So
Yeah.
then you see the kind of pressure that they were in the story they were in.
Yeah.
So somehow when you could make, in a dream or something like that, or in a memory, you can locate the being and see the story they were in. Then you don't somehow associate the being with the story so much. You see that somehow, if they broke up, it probably saved everyone's life. If you forced them to stay together, it probably would have been a disaster. You know? Okay. So some event had to happen which looked like a flaw or a mistake, but you see how brilliant it was because it shifts something instantly. And I can't say that John got a stroke in order to do this, but I say, look how we missed John for a month. He was pissed off about something, seemingly we didn't hear from him. Okay. And then all of a sudden the stroke got me on everyday call. What's going on? Is it? Okay. Instantly, where I couldn't have called so easily myself. So that somehow Kerry, as being the guy who was the main information guy, then changed the whole picture again. Where, okay, that dumb thing about the caring for someone turning into a job, each person, when it was exposed, kind of had a herd about it in our story. So then all of a sudden, that causes a break in some ways of the creative story. And then all of a sudden, the near-death experience brings you closer to a choiceless expression of just caring for the person and seeing how it's going. And somehow changing your own schedule to accommodate that. And it's natural. But you see, built into the system, one's existence, are all these expressions. But it needs an event for it to happen. So they could not have had a conversation while they were breaking up. And they said, look, why don't you just have a stroke? I'll feel so bad. Or something like that. They said they could not have planned it. But it was always there in the situation since you were taking care of a person who was sick. So that stroke was always waiting in some way in the circumstance. But when it actually happened, when there's a literalness of it, it kind of then forces you to see something from a different place. And you also see that there was an attempt to avoid that responsibility too. In other words, how do you break up with someone that you see is physically on their way out like that? So you say, well, I would find a way to, we would have an argument about something so I wouldn't have to care for that person forever while they're yelling at you or something like that. So then, let's say the person would then force you to come back into the picture from a different place where it is, there's a shared experience between you. And apparently they've shared something very deep. And so the conversation has dying in it. It may not be spoken, it may be thought of as therapy, but somehow there is dying in the relationship. And somehow it may not be addressed literally as dying. That may be too much, but that one is perceived as dying and living in a circumstance. You see then life's challenges are also coming from a different place. Is that Kerry back again? Oh, hi, Kerry.
Hi.
I mean, again, it's not to read more in the story, but then you see in retrospect the writing of, the filming of, the thinking of what you shared with someone, where you naturalized, you made an everydayness of a near dyingness as a constant. And you see then you see your relationship then to folks. And you see when that relationship shifts, even though it may be a normal thing that's happening, it's a deep thing that's happening with people. It's hard for them to release you. And it's hard for you to release them, even though logically it says, hey. So you see that, that you then are forced to then try to engineer something and act normal, while you're kind of getting out of a commitment, a literal commitment to something. And it looks like a simple bye baby, and you say, no, it ain't that simple, bye baby. And I say, why? Because the people have invested their life to some degree with each other. So they're also imagining a life then without that person that they can call or be with or share with. Or maybe they'll be happy to be out of this situation. But you see that somehow you stepped into what appears to be a complex story, where the observer would just see a simple situation unfolding. The person experiencing it is not as free as their observer would have them be. The observer says, okay, I'll catch you later, and they say, no, it's not. As you enter into the literal story and you land into the story, you start to see it's coming from so many different places. So when the person then says to you that you've been living with and sharing life with, you old creep, why don't you take a walk and leave me the hell alone? You say, okay, right, I'll catch you later, but it is your death experience to some degree, even though it's not your death, you see it more. You understand death from a different place than a literal dying. But you understand somehow leaving this life while you're in it. And that somehow a part of you is left, an essential creative part of you has left the life. And you have an aspect of you still living. That comes close to the broken heart and the love, where part of you is managing a day-to-day, but part of you has come close to dying. So there is a dialogue that's going in and close to dying. And we'll say the love affair was your living or dying in some degree. Or had you close to a phenomenon. Let's say the love affair just revealed a closeness to a living and dying being in the story. And let's say your circumstance in caring for your family, for John, for the person that you lived with as it's shifting, is really one that has kind of living and dying in it. And that somehow the living and dying phenomena allows you to come back or share a week or share a life as if you've been living together a long time. But that there's an inherent element in you that you would care for some. You want the job. But there's also an inherent guy in you that does not want to be a schmuck because he cares for some. So that'll be a very challenging job. Do you want to try it? let's say from a clear place. You go in as a kind of schmucky guy who will instantly care for someone and then somehow make a story together out of that care. But if
Yeah.
that story literalizes,
Yeah.
then somehow Kerry finds a way out of it because he can't then really pretend to be a caretaker. He can't pretend to be a husband. He can't pretend to
Right.
be. He can do those roles if his feeling is there.
Right.
But okay. But somehow the feeling has to be there for him to assume those roles.
Yeah.
If the feeling is shifted, if your parents say, you better get down to Hawaii immediately and shut up, and then you say, well, I'll catch you later. Okay. Or if John says, you go to the grocery store now at midnight and go buy me, you say, look, I'll catch you later. So let's say something in you becomes disturbed when it literalizes, and you have to do it, where you are kind of volunteering it from a different feeling. And you perceive that in yourself. You see the changing climate when it. That somehow, when the situation becomes more around survival than it is around what you're sharing, then the survival mind is constantly scheming on how to make a buck, how to do this, how to do it. And so in that environment, when you're then in a situation, even with yourself or with someone where you're constantly figuring out how to make a buck, how to do this or that, and that becomes a dominant principle in the circumstance, and you can't deny the logic of it. But then you see that most of the things that you were concerned about become then squished down into survival.
Right.
When it was, hey, John, we shared a love affair. What a schmucky scene we've had. You taught me a little bit about music, this and that. And we made it like it was natural all these years. And now this is my job. This weird scene that I'm in with you.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And then when I leave you, I've got a weirder scene. And I say, why? Because I can't do this because of that. Okay. I say, do you want the job? That's remarkably creative. If I had to do Carrie, I say, holy shit. Does he have a stash?
No.
And they say, not
No,
that much.
sorry.
You got 2 weeks of Kerry hanging out there. So, okay. And he's got 2 weeks. How do you have a year, Kai, that you can continue as Kai? Kai, I'm asking.
I know, I don't know.
Let's say 3. How long do you? Not literally, but creatively. You see that things are changing now, or in flux, right? The kids are growing. This is shifting. A year?
Well, that's our goal, to be in Santa Monica by a year. So I'd say yes, a year.
Santa Monica may come out to Pennsylvania. You see, although I called Reed yesterday about how it is out there in Santa Rosa, we're hearing about fires and everything, and how bad it was with the heat, but he was still biking around, and so somehow there's the news, and then you call a friend and you say, well, how is it? And you say, well, personally, it seems to be okay. We're dealing with it or whatever, So the news has a whole larger picture, like the whole West Coast is burning.
Right.
Or it gives that appearance, or that even here that they're saying the drought, and you say, holy shit. But then you also see all the farms and you see everything is going on as normal to some degree. So both things are happening apparently. But let's say creatively, again, like we kid around with Urja a year, 2 years, or with, it's not so much kidding around because our seasons, a year, just look how fast this the last year and a half has gone. I don't know if it was slow or fast or didn't even have that description of slow and fast, but it just happened. And
Yes.
we're coming to July, and oof, boy, we're in July already. Halfway through July already. So that's very, it's like that, it seems to be. Yet it was very slow living.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm? So let's say it's been lived on many levels while nothing much has been happening. But it's the lack of activity in some way that then created a new normalcy of hanging out,
Yes.
where the day has some kind of hanging out attitude to it. And
Mhm.
even if you hung out with a book, or you hung out with a TV show, or you hung out with a conversation, whatever, then you were online with your friends, but you all shared what 500 years ago you would have said that you all shared the Black Plague together. When people were dying and this was happening, and they were trying all kinds of theories on people and this and that, and it was in the streets, and yet life was going on in its own weird way. But the people who were experiencing it experienced a weird life where you still had to farm and you still had to get food together and you light shit together or whatever. But that something was claiming part of the population. So you see that somehow we're in it, but not of it. That somehow there's a larger story happening around us. But we're in our life, we're living our life in the midst of a creative process that's taking place that we'll be able to see. When I say when there's a future looking back at its life, I mean there's a kind of purity looking back at its life. And purity means that it didn't own the life. It gets to see dimensions of life, of its life that it's lived, that others may have seen, but it sees for the first time in retrospect. And so you may see what the neighborhood knew, but you discover. And when you discover the life, you see a creative thread running through the life that is not owned by the identity, that is on a journey. And so as you become aware of the journey in life, the literal reality that you lived through, your age and your time and your name and what you did, and that becomes less of you than the journey that you've been on. But to have access to the journey means that something has happened to you where you don't own it. You see that all the experiences in the journey then were important. Even the mistakes and the screw-ups and the falling apart, you see creatively the importance of the experience where logic doesn't own it. You see, you meet a being in yourself that has lived through you. So sometimes it resembles a ghost or an exorcist or this or that, but you see that there is a yearning, and his yearning is not a psychological state, but it has a relationship to the mystery.
Yeah.
And as you become aware of somehow the mystery ran through your life in the everyday, you see that your own history is more a series of accidents or situations that unfolded. And that somehow you're in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Holy shit. It would be as if I woke up one day and say, holy shit, I'm Kai and I'm in Pennsylvania.
I do that every day.
And I said, holy, let me give this a shot. I don't know that I can pull this one off here. And I say, why? I said, because it would be like a triple Academy Award performance. I have to be in. How weird for me my heart would have to be in the situation I was in. I said, how could your heart be in Pennsylvania and this? And I say, you know, if you got two cool kids and you got this and you got that, you understand that somehow Pennsylvania is not a bad place. It's better than being in the Himalayas in the same situation that you would have. Okay. So preferring to be, it probably had to be Pennsylvania for you to pull off what you did.
Probably. There are no distractions.
But if you were in LA, they would have gotten on your case. They wouldn't have allowed you to have the kids and this. So somehow you had to sneak off to Pennsylvania to have the kids.
It's true.
And somehow you owed your body 2 kids somehow. It was bugging you. Get that guy. Go after that one. Look at that one. And they said, no, he's the one. They said, no, he's okay. That's the guy you want. So
But now
let's say there's been.
the kids want to be in LA though.
Well, because you want to be in LA also, because it represents a kind of releasing of the energy.
Mm.
Because it was nice to be born in Pennsylvania, but then the living in it is stifling the creative expression. So you know there's a creative element between you. And you want to kind of free the story so it's not a violation of it, but somehow you understand that it needs to find its expression. And so then you're figuring, so it's not just an accident that you're thinking of these places. It's just that automatically, if you open the door and you go out, there's something that you may run to the beach, you may take a walk over here, you may run into. So you see, that completely opening up the life is what you're dreaming of.
Yes.
Just by opening up your door and going outside. Okay. So let's say why. I say because presumption is that you can dream.
Yes.
And the presumption is in Pennsylvania that your dream is stupid.
Yes.
That you're kind of dreaming of getting away from there. You know that you're a family that is dreaming. And they want families that are dreaming of staying there, not from there. So they're going to yell at you when you walk through the neighborhood. Because they know that you have a kind of dreaming life. And to them, the dreaming life is a fearful life. But it's not a stupid life. It's in fact a creative life because you're dreaming within a context. You'll look back on it. You'll maybe write a book or write something in time of the experiences that you just shared. And that it was natural.
Mm-hmm.
But in retrospect, you see the complexity that you've been managing. And that somehow you have been managing a no-trip situation so that there is a spiteful memory of you.
Right.
So I feel that you should get a PhD in this.
I know. I agree.
You could pull this off. We'll say lots of luck. Okay, something is going to grab you by the nose and give you a kick. But at the same time, in retrospect, you perceive the life itself as a creative act. And then as you perceive it as a creative act, you take on the morality, which is not the strict morality of organized religion or this or that, but you see the human morality that comes from a certain thread that runs through the story for you. So I feel that one accesses their own life that they've lived from a different place than the literal person, but that they see that somehow they found a way to manage. They've become almost an immune system in their circumstance. They're managing so many personas, personalities, and circumstances, and still keeping normalcy out of it. when in fact you see it's really creative material. The life that you're living is more than a literal life. It's all the dimensions that have been lived in a normal situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is anyone else on other than us characters?
Well, we have quite a few people on YouTube. We have, let's see, Henry, Sophia, John Kowalski, Will Wright is working, but on now Magic Sufi, I found out is Michael Bravo. So he's been on almost every week. Chrissy.
Okay, so is it okay with them that we're kind of we're taking our everyday life and turning it into a stream of consciousness? But we also see in the stream of consciousness that there is a parallel life being lived with the literal life. So let's say we've just gone through a year and a half or so of something, an up in the airness to some extent, that entered into the literalness of everyone's life, even though life went on. But that one will have access in time to a happening that was almost an everydayness while you were living it. That became a normalcy. But in retrospect, you will see creative dimensions running through the story that one could almost write about. And you see how one navigated through the story. But what navigated through the story was not the self. The self was literally doing what it's done, but you see that a creative dimension was also simultaneously taking place while a literal survival dimension was taking place. And to discover that is to kind of something shifts in your own temperament, where you can see you and not you simultaneously in your own existence, where you can see karmic time and dharmic time simultaneously. And when you see the simultaneity, where in literal time and karmic time, there's a literal you with a literal social security number who has an age and a circumstance and a sexuality, all these things of description that are historically, when one entered into the place, you then assumed an identity that was waiting for you, that literalized your existence. And in literalizing your existence, it kind of suppressed other dimensions of your being towards a survival being. But then you also see that you have experiences of you, something happens where I meet my mother, as I say in the diary, and I meet a woman, not a mother. And I see that there was a coexisting story while I had the story of myself living. There was a coexisting story where I presumed the mother was a literal being, was a mother who happened to be a woman. And then I discover a woman who happened to be a mother. And I see the world before me. I see the situation before me, but still there is me in it. Me in hopes, me in dreams, me in fears. I see the events, the everyday schmucky events before my own birth. And you see the interactions and the play, and you see that you come more from a mystery than a history of accidents, of circumstance, of situations happening that literalized. So you meet the mystery in your history. And when you do that perceptively, some doorway of perception opens with that perception. Where the story is released, you see that there has been dharmic time, a time that is not, it's discovery time. Discovery opens up a doorway that sends you back 50 years, 50 minutes from the perspective as if you were observing the story, where you were of it, you were in it, but not of it. You were not determined by the history then of the life, but you started to see that there was a corresponding mystery that was also happening. And as one becomes aware of the mystery, there is you understand spirituality not being something that you assume, but a perception that enters into the story. And as the perception enters into the story, you see that you are more the Uber driver of the story, not the owner of the story. And so then you start to see what looked like an organized life to be a life that happens through accidents, mistakes, screw-ups. All these situations have a very important expression in the life that one has lived. And the perception of that changes one's relationship to it, where you can see in the everyday or perceptively the common sense becomes almost that one enters into the story. From having died to the literal story, one comes into the story from a different perspective where it's no longer around survival being the main ingredient. That's one aspect of it. It is that there is a creative experience inherently in the story that was living consciously. But conscious meaning does not being superior or owning the story. In fact, it means somewhat that the life is not your possessive, but that you're a caretaker for it. And when you then become a caretaker for the life, you then meet a life that is kind of I and thou. That the thou is a conversation, what they call God or with the energy, but you see that there is a love somehow hidden in the bushes in the story that's in the story, but not of it. It's not of the history. It's when you are free to meet it. The perception of something that was always existing. But then you perceive it changes the relationship to it, where the love is not a possessive. Just like when the love affairs that we did have, if the person was absent for a long time or whatever, and there was still a love, you somehow have a sense of what that experience would be like. Where the love and absence in memory is as deep as it is in presence. While we're simply living the day to day. And so the loss of that feeling is a broken heart. The throwing away of that feeling in retrospect brings you to a dimension of what you would call the broken heart, which is everything, it's associated with death experience, so it's everything that would be avoided. But you see the other side of the broken heart is like meeting the mirror, seeing the story from a different perspective. So you then may see many other relationships are naturally attached to they're going to have the broken heart no matter what. You see that they can't be talked out of it. It in fact is an experience waiting. That if you imprison them, they would break out of prison to find each other to have that experience. So what looks like a flaw in the makeup or something that has to be trained, you see that somehow to have the broken heart, it had to be true in some way. So I feel that the broken heart is a disaster experience supposedly in the life because it's a death experience while you're living. But I also see that it meets a place where the mind can't go. It meets the world from having had a death experience while it's alive. And it's through the love affair lost. But I feel then it re-enters the story from a different place, where it's human and then it's assuming an identity. So I feel the broken heart is the ending of the identity's possession of the life. The naturalness of the identity possessing the life as if there's a historical you that is you. But then I think you discover a mystery you that is you. a mystery that happens to have elements of history running through, but the history is no longer determinate. And I feel that even then, in that perception, your relationship to your parents go from history to mystery. And you see then that the history of your life is actually more poetry than it is literal. The story is released from its continuity as being a medium. So I feel that some of us are in that situation, as I kid around with Ursula and others, where the perception of living and dying in the simultaneity of the moment. Once that is perceived, that living and dying is the normalcy of life, then you start to see that all structure is, at the same time it's continuing, is also dissolving simultaneously. And you see that even comes into structural relationships as it continues, as it becomes naturalized, you see that it's still a yearning for love or a true feeling or whatever. So then that there are corresponding events waiting. When the feeling is lost in the structure and the continuity become the main reason for it, or survival becomes the main reason for it, then there's an event waiting in the circumstance that seems tragic, but the event releases the story from its continuum and has you seeing your life more as if it was a creative act or a journey. So the perception literally frees the story from a continuum to a creative expression. And then you see that there is a dialogue that's always been going on with you about whether you're into something or not. And so you see when you've been forced to be into something that you're not fully into, okay. So then you perceive it. You see why the flaws were there, why certain screw-ups happen or whatever. Because even though it may have been a screw-up in the past, when you look at it, you see it was brilliantly engineered to get you out of a prison. It was brilliantly engineered to get you out of a loveless situation. And you had to be a screw-up in order to do that. You understand? They had to say, they had to fire you or get rid of you or kick you out or something like that somehow. But somehow you breathe a kind of sigh of relief that you were free from that situation. So let's say the examination of one's life in retrospect has more magical thinking, as we've been accused of, whereas not such a literal existence. You see that the literalness of your life has been only one aspect of it. But you start to see other dimensions that change the picture for you, where you re-enter the story from a different place. So I say, when you'll be able to see the year and a half that you've just been through, and it normalized itself. But in retrospect, we'll have a creative connection to it, that we've had an experience that became normal, but somehow influenced everything. Influenced the politics of something, influenced the situation, influenced what was happening in the world and here and there and so on. That correspondingly it had these upheavals going on at the same time with the norm, that the norm is really a conspiracy. And so you see the up in the airness as a fact of our own existence. And we've made it normal. But we enter into a zone that is still unfolding in front of us. Are we okay then? Shall we call it a day? I hope everyone's okay out there, the folks I haven't met before. But it's again this, someone called yesterday with this question about the pain of it all. if you get to be a certain situation or whatever where your body is captured in the pain of it all, and and one's life then becomes a management of pain. What do you say, Urja? You know something about the management of pain?
Yes, I do.
What do we call the management of pain? Is that somehow for you to be normal, you need to be free from a toothache and a knee ache and a backache and a arthritis and cancer. Somehow all these things interfere with a normal day.
If it goes to a certain degree, yes.
Right? Let's say, if they say, hey, you've got cancer, they tell me now today, and they say, oh man, I was going to walk tonight, but now that I've got cancer, I don't know that I can watch with a straight face. And they say,
Right.
well, if you take some drugs or something, you'll be able to continue.
Yeah.
And they say, well, what am I doing then? If in fact the information is that I'm dying, but for me, all that's happening to me is that there's a pain happening. I want to manage the pain so that I can have a degree of normalcy. So, do you see yourself doing that, managing the pain?
I see, yes, I do a macro dosing.
Okay.
And
So but you're attempting to manage the pain naturally.
yeah, not to erase it completely, but to have it so that I can still walk and be active.
Yeah. So basically, you don't want to just go out and get some heroin
No,
and shoot up the heroin and manage your pain that way.
no.
So somehow you want to make sure that it's still pure
Yes.
in your mind's eye. That somehow you're not taking some artificial ingredient when they show you on TV, get this for that, and then they show you 100 things that can go wrong with you if you take this. This could happen, that could happen. And you say, well, yeah, that can happen anytime you take these powerful medicines.
Yeah.
They're not only medicines, they're made up of all kinds of chemicals and circumstance. So then the immune system and the body, all of a sudden having too much of this lead in it or that in it. So you may have helped it for an hour or two. But then you say, okay, then in managing the pain to some degree, especially if you're using medicine, you're doing a trade-off of buying time.
Yeah.
So then I say, okay, I know there'll be a future problem for me if I take this stuff, but it'll allow me to get through this month or this week or this day or something like that. So you're making bargains with the story. So then you read every label because you know that they're slipping in all kinds of stuff there in print that you can't even see. So
Yeah.
let's say, what are you doing? And I say, well, she's trying to keep something natural and managing the pain. But somehow how she manages the pain is important to her. She doesn't want to be unconscious to manage the pain. She doesn't want to lose her sense of being who she is, managing the pain. So somehow managing the pain is not, she understands the condition that the pain is telling her is happening. That it's not the pain itself, but parts of the body seem to be surrendering unless you want to do something about it.
Yeah.
Parts of the body are starting to surrender, that you find out a phenomenon, that it doesn't all die at once, but sometimes the knee dies before you, or the feet die before you, or something like that, or somehow it gives up and it keeps pieces going. But then it also, you have seen in your own life, like we were kidding around with these old people of square dancing. So you see, even then, even if they create an artificial condition, it could also create a kind of health if there's an activity between people. But then for you, you see if there's an interest that comes your way, that also informs the health.
Yes.
so that there's health for you to live the life that you're living.
Yes.
And so you see that there's a management, not an ownership, but there's a management. And you become aware of your own life in ways
Yes.
that you've been trying to find out through meditation and through other forms, and you see you're in it. And somehow in being in it, it's allowed you a perceptive. At the same time that you're going through something, you also have a sense of the life and your own management of it. And you see the care that one has been caring for the life that they're in, and then has cared for the kids that they've had, and one has cared for the friends that they've known, and one has cared. So you see that there has been a natural feeling in one's life that has given you a life, where it was natural. And yet it may have driven you crazy, it may have driven you here and there, whatever, but it was natural for you to care for people and care for a situation, and somehow that care has given you a life, or has entered into the life that you've lived as a very important ingredient.
Yeah. Now.
And now you find out that you're caring for the life that you're in. And you see that inside yourself you have there's memory banks and situations still inherently there.
Yes.
And so to some degree you're having the experience of dying.
Yes.
Even in the films that you watch, you're having your own experience of dying. And seeing something else dying and seeing something else moving and having an associative relationship to the movie, you then have a perspective on your life. And you start to see that the movie resembles more reality than the literal reality of identity. You see that all along in your life there has been a dharmic existence with a karmic one. And you see that throughout our life we've been seeking this dharmic existence through meditation, through this form, through spirituality. We've been seeking how to be in the dharmic existence while it's been coexisting with us. So your access to it, you may have had to do a mantra to access some magical aspect of your life that was already happening. The mantra revealed it, didn't create it. So even the study of spirituality revealed a spiritual life, didn't create a spiritual life.
Right.
And as you start to see the double dimension in your existence, it becomes normal for you. You're caring for something at the same time. There's a dual dimension. There's an attraction to you when you perceive that you're caring for something, but there's also a resistance to you because you see something that upsets the status quo by your presence. And so your presence reveals, even if you woke up all of a sudden and you were in the army and they were about to attack the enemy, and you all of a sudden woke up and you said, how full of shit this all is. You understand? Okay. And you saw that what you were being trained to do or whatever, there was a full of shitness in it that changed the picture. And they said, are you guys kidding, man? You're going to go out there and kill kids and do that shit? And, okay. So you see how dangerous you would be if you woke up. Because if you woke up, you could not be there for an inhumanity. You would laugh at it. Are you kidding me? That you grown men are going to go flying in there and do this stupid shit to people who are sleeping. And what dirty rat bastards you are. Okay. So then I say, and I was just about to do that until all of a sudden I woke up. Something happened and I said, what the hell? But then you see how it upsets your relationship to an organized world when you kind of wake up. Because then you see that the organized world was also had an underlying violence of survival in it. And then it preached survival. as being the main ingredient. So survival entered every picture. And survival was inherently competitive. And so the survival meant me and you as a separation. So somehow the idea of cooperation or sharing became stupid. A shared life became a stupid life. When in fact the intelligence ran through the shared life. But as the survival dimension took over, it had its own logic. As being the original people, they own the place, they're the ones, they know what they're talking about. Okay. But you start to see a process that's taking place of change is always happening in the form. Just as in your own life, you went from youth to old age, and you see the shifts and changes and perspectives that happen with each phase of the life. And as you experience the phases of your life in retrospect, you see an unfoldment taking place for you. And that there has always been a conversation. And the conversation somehow has been around the magical life or magical thinking and dying and magical thinking that somehow it naturalized that there would be a love out there, that there would be a this, that there's an existence for you, that you'll assume an identity. You meet the magic of your own life. And you see the journey that went through the literalness of your life. And you see that you, the you that is the identity, only meets parts of itself by accident, by circumstance. And when it does, it's changed. Because the literal you owns the story. So he thinks that your history is you. But the evocative discovery is that you see that there's been a mystery running through your life that's even stronger than the history. And that no matter what, it was looking for a love. While it was in all these stories, no matter what, it was always looking for something that looked like it was magical thinking, creative thinking, absurd thinking, but somehow there was a part of one's being that had a conversation with the mystery. And then you look in retrospect, you see the conversation with the mystery has given one a life. So don't take too many things, Urja.
No, I don't. I take edible and very little, maybe 3 times a day. And it seems to work. I haven't had to.
What did you say? You're taking what? 3 times a day?
Edibles, like 7 milligram.
Yeah.
in-
But
What are
didn't
edibles?
you say that you were doing the opium pipe?
No, I've never done.
That Chinese
No,
movie? No.
I have maybe 3 times taken morphine.
They actually, when they gave my mother those, remember those things that she reacted to? They gave her those patches and she went. But then my friend, a neurologist in New York, said they should have given her pure morphine with nothing in it. They say the problem with the drugs that they'll give you is not the opiates, but what they mix it with.
Oh,
They mix it with generally Tylenol, a large degree of Tylenol, which they found causes liver problems. So then all of a sudden it created its own problems. But what they found was years ago, people who were buying the opiates would cook them or snort them instead of taking them. So then they put Tylenol because it was gummy. But then they found out that besides making a couple of $1 billion, they found that the Tylenol was creating liver problems. Because the people then who were taking the opiates were taking quite a few of them. They were taking real large doses of Tylenol or that sort of thing in these. So they found that a byproduct that you have to measure when you're getting these, how much it says, they don't call it Tylenol. They have, I think, AMC written on it. And that you want it to be as low as possible. but they try to make it as high as possible.
Yes.
So it's very weird. So that's why he recommended for my mother that they do have a pure morphine. And that they felt that the morphine like that, the pure morphine was pretty kind to the body.
Yeah. It's
And that they did use something, that's when they say opium pipes, but opium pipes as kidding around was a way when you were then passing away that you then devoted yourself to. So the opium pipe was a ritual of passing.
Mm.
Hmm?
Mm-hmm.
Where it allowed you memory from a different way. It allowed you spiritual memory.
the peyote. Does the Indian use peyote? Is it mind alter?
You know, there was an attempt where you get to a space where you don't own the story. You understand? So let's say the opium pipe put you in a space where the me factor surrendered, the owner of the story. So then you saw past life and death, and you saw the story that you experienced. So somehow there was something in the opium and the ritual of the opium that was to give you a pure insight into your life.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't high as much as there was a part of you that's not included in the story that will get to see the story of one's life.
Yeah.
So somehow, if they've tried to find a way where you meet that energy in yourself, where you view the story of your life from a different place. So you weren't stoned like stone. You were stoned where another part of your brain was working. And so for you to view that in your life, you had to kind of be pure. So I thought that they said that the opium and its smoking like that was an attempt to have a pure perspective of the life that you've lived without you in the way, without the ownership of it. But that somehow it got you close to purity. It gave you an insight into your own existence. So it was seen as medicine like that, but not as a curative medicine or not as treatment, but as somehow that gave you an elevated sense of something. So I feel that that is naturally happening at the same time that even you're making choices to live or to do something today or whatever. You are somehow choosing to carry on. And somehow you have an agreement. And the agreement may be as dumb as the whole body is agreeing then to watch a movie on Netflix tonight.
1 year.
Holy, how weird that is. You're going to make the comment every day. And they say, well, you know, it's coming that way for me, where somehow there's an agreement to carry on. Now, we were here the other day and we were just sitting at the table and Spiro was here and he was going to leave soon for Taos, where he is now. And Mary's sister then called that maybe she's looking at a space to have her own space. And then when they looked at it and they said, okay, you know, we can just, I'll give the guy a painting and we'll rent it for 4 months. He's an artist himself and he'll know. And then we'll just move all our stuffy, crazy stuff that we have there. We'll move it there, create a space. There'll be a hangout. We have some talks there. And we just have a hangout for 4 months. And then you could also have a little store that's not literally a store where you're selling something, but if a guy wants to buy a painting, he wants to buy that, you can do that. But just have a hangout kind of situation and your own business, but let your hangout be your business. And since you gave the guy a painting for 4 months, you got 4 months free to play with the space and who's coming by, and you can invite folks by. And so we were almost going to open a place tomorrow after a 10-minute conversation. You know, and I say, And Spiro, you can do Bitcoins and this and that. And I think that Seth is making bags and belts and stuff like that. So everyone can drop by and do their thing. And there's a little living space. And so I say, something like that would take you 10 years to do. And yet I see it was waiting there. And there's enough paintings and art. That's like Bitcoins for me. Like all these transactions and situations that we've had over the years are hanging on the wall and this and that. Okay. So I see immediately happening is that I can't do it so easily. I don't do business like that, you understand? But an accidental space where you gave a guy a painting and he gave you 4 months rent free, and it was a big place and a cool space and you can move everything for a while in that space. And let it become its own expression. It seems so easy to me. And it was almost there. We went, looked at the space and just for a minute. But then it was more it wasn't the right space.
Mm.
But then Mary said, we can do that with her space that she has. That we could just hang out there, and then there's a place next door we may rent. And so you see that waiting hidden in plain sight, where the experience that you've just had will be part of your teachings. Where in fact you see that what you've been teaching, you've just been through.
Yes.
And one be in a Shakti space and then live in Pennsylvania in a circumstance while they're in a Shakti space. And they came and they say, well, give it a shot, Shakti. Try to do this Pennsylvania thing. And you say, well, hold it, that would be a real creative experience if you're coming from a different place. If you Shakti into the story. And you see a problem for you would be that you're bringing Shakti into the story. And then you see the grace of you would be that you are bringing Shakti into the story at the same time. So you see, because you bring Shakti in the story, they're going to give you a real kick in the ass and they want you to be literal and do things. But then they're also going to give you a respect. Okay. So you see both things are there, a pro and con. And you can see that love and hate may even be in the same movement.
Mm-hmm.
And they may hate you because they loved you. And you say, oh man, I'm stepping into 5,000 years of history in an everyday circumstance where you can see all history is kind of revealing it like that and unfolding. And so at the same time, you then discovered people who then had a creative life and a regular life simultaneously. Where the people in the regular life had no clue of the creative life that the person brought to them, but they thought that the person was literally their mother or their uncle or whatever. And then they discover years later that they were a person who did them the favor, So let's say that there are many lives being lived in one life. And that memory is a kind of reservoir that frees the story when it has a genuine experience. And then you see that that when you went back into the story and released it through a kind of apology, because you perceive what the person went through, the story is released in some way from the possessor. But then there is a danger of them falling in love with you again.
I know.
And knocking on your door.
I know I did start to do that a little bit. But.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. But that may be okay. Someone called who was has always been a difficult character, but then called in such pain that the pain kind of introduces us to each other beyond the story. And I said, well, like Urja said there, what she's taking then we found a naive way of relating where you're making the body mellow through this RSO oil, but it's our wishful thinking that's doing it actually. but
Mhm.
somehow you found the blend where someone loves you enough to make it, and you found a blend that doesn't get you high, but kind of gets your body cool.
That's nice. Yeah.
Mhm. And so, but you purposely don't want to be high, or you purposely don't want to be stoned or anything like that. You want to be clear.
Right.
Mhm. And that means clear being with the energy of the story, the thread that's running through the story. Okay. You'd like to be there for the life that you've lived. And that comes with each perception, a kind of freeing of the story from the literal. And then you discover a kind of hidden dimension that somehow you can change the plane if you wish to. It's not really living longer in the traditional sense of time, but it may turn out to be living longer. But your interest, so you don't have to do square dancing and do all that stuff like they're getting old people doing with each other. But somehow within yourself, you may decide to live a bit longer. And that's why I kid around and say a year. I don't mean literally a year. I mean that you're playing with time and space and situations. And you see you doing that anyway, even in the dumb Netflix or this or that, or having nothing to do. You see that you are doing something. And you are creating a kind of structure that doesn't have a literal reality to it, but it is a creative zone that you've put for yourself. And so you are dialoguing with dying and living simultaneously.
Wow.
And you are getting an agreement from your body and your circumstance if you'd like to carry on or do this thing or whatever. And so that's why I saw the RSO oil to be that kind of an agreement with the body somehow. That it's all together. And so it's really interesting where it's not so much that you're personalizing the relationship to the body, but you're kind of recognizing that your body has as much a right to the story that you've lived as you do. And that your nose may have memories of the story that you don't know about. You say, yeah, do you remember what you did to me? When your body talks to you like that, you say, yeah, you went in and got the shot, but do you know what you did with us? There, you really got us crazy. We didn't know what to do. And they say, why? Okay. And they say, because it's not so much consultation doesn't mean that you're taking a vote of the body. It means that you're considering the life that you're in a way that's almost purely, you're getting an agreement somehow that has come even with your own body that has a hey baby conversation in it. You want to do this thing any longer? It's a heartfelt conversation that one has with their own body. So I feel the kind of paths that we followed, all of us, have that kind of Mushugana conversation in it, where in fact that consultation is happening for you, or sure it's happening for me, where you're asking your own body, hey baby, are you still into it, as if it's a love relationship. And so then you discover your relationship to your body is a love relationship.
Yes.
And then when it breaks up, it then starts to complain or break up or whatever. But then when something happens to your body, there's a concern for you that you're okay. Just like it's a concern for a lover that they're okay if they're sick. So one starts to meet the life from a different place, where it's not so much the continuity. The continuity is an aspect of the love affair and not so much in charge of it. But that one has set themselves up to have the whole experience, whether it's in 1 minute or 1 year or another lifetime. But that somehow one is in their life consciously. And the consciousness doesn't mean literalness. It means that somehow you're aware that you're alive. And you're aware that there's some creative dialogues that are happening. And that to some extent, the events have freed us from the literal story of survival in a tough way that somehow we've been able to keep it together without it being outrageous, without scheming, without scamming, without tripping, that somehow we've been able to keep a civilized life together in our own way. Mhm. Okay, I'll see you then.
Sure then.
We'll see you soon.
Yes.
Either Sunday or Thursday.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Danny. I don't know if I'll be here Sunday's Rod's birthday and Monday's my birthday, so I'm
Oh
not sure.
boy, oh boy. Do you want something?
I want an apartment in Santa Monica.
Okay, let's see.
We all visualize it.
What?
I'll visualize it. We
Okay.
all.
So,
Oh no, we're all aware of what you're like, and so somehow there is like we were kidding around with Spiro the other day, and so Santa Monica is one part of his natural spaces to go through, and I think that he stays in the space of friends that he's had in Silver Lake. They let him use the house there, and
oh, okay.
So it's and they had their own yoga school there for a while there in LA. So they normalize it. So there are friends living all the places, and I think he hangs out with friends and shares a lifestyle with them.
Yeah.
And he uses their space or whatever. And I think he's up in Taos now figuring out. So and there's a read, there's a happening out there.
Yes.
So
There is.
but it kind of has to happen accidentally or whatever. It almost happened with Jai when we were kidding around. But probably it wasn't the right time for you to leave your circle. So you are measuring the invitation and the circumstance you're in. And so you don't want it to violate the circumstance you're in.
No.
So somehow you've created a situation where you are free to go. Just like that conversation that I had, are these folks free to fall in love? Are these folks free to follow their vision?
Yes.
And so it's not so much Santa Monica as are they free to follow their vision that they've created a vision between themselves. And are they free? Now, who will get pissed off if you have a vision? Okay, there may be a valid complaint. Sure, you have a vision, but you leave me. Okay. But then that may be then an actual conversation. But the question is that human beings must be free, and also a mommy and their kids must be free to follow their dream.
Yeah.
And somehow, in fact, you provide for that to the degree you can, even if you give them your blessings. But blessings may be much of what you needed.
Yeah.
That you have a blessings to try this thing. And this thing is to a shared life where everyone's on board with each other. You want to try this? There is a woman, Anne-Marie here, who's been pretty remarkable in her in what she's created. I think she comes from, but she's also very beautiful. But
yes,
in her circumstance. But then she did open. She had a husband that they broke up then, and they had a few kids that are really sweet. But then she's created, I think she worked with Mary for a while and created a community that she has. But then has created a restaurant. And then most of the people working there are from most of them are students working in the food industry. So she's teaching a lot of kids there that run the place. And then she's had love affairs. I told you she had that with that fellow from that show that was on HBO or whatever. He was winning a Grammy or an Emmy or something. And that broke up. But she's a free person in some ways. And I wave at her. I see her there, but she's doing her thing. She's free to fall in love. She's free to do this. But the kids are seemingly on board with her. And they are beautiful.
Yes.
Too. And even the ex-husbands are cool. And Now, I don't know if I entered into the story where they may be really broken hearts that are running through it or whatever they broke, but somehow there is a kind of
Grace.
there's a kind of grace, and yet you could be in trouble in a minute or whatever because she's taken on then a real project of making sure that the kids are cool,
Yes.
and yet being free to live our life and make it natural. Where somehow she's so I feel that you're in a similar situation where you're not owned by anything, but by a kind of truth that runs through you. And of course, there's screw ups that you've had, but I think the screw ups, when you look at it in retrospect, were brilliant. Even though you may have gotten in trouble in the circumstance or whatever. But it does seem to me that creatively, you're trying to manage something where everybody in the circumstance is human, comes from a human feeling, you know.
Mhm.
So I feel that you've been managing that. You may still get a kick, but at the same time, from the perspective of seeing what you've been going through, it's almost a pure creation, as if it's almost a movie of yourself in some way. And so then you're understanding the inner feelings that run through it from the perspective of seeing an artwork. And that somehow you've been attempting to invite everyone who shared that with you and to be on the same page together. Without it being a rule or a law or something like that, but there's a mutual perception share that comes with friendship. And if in fact you can have that element of friendship running through the family, that would be remarkable, because usually what we share with friends is almost impossible to share with family.
Mhm.
Because the intimacy shows a vulnerability. And in the vulnerability, that is frightful in the literal world, where you're supposed to be somebody. But in the friendship, there is a creative vulnerability that has you understanding that you are you and that you are assuming this role. And you're bringing that feelings that you have into the role that you're in. But from the friendship, you're not the role, you're a friend. So no matter what level you're on in the world, from the friendship, whatever complexity that you enter into as an identity, from the friendship, you're seen from a different energy that's assuming an identity. And then you see the challenge that the person is under. Okay, I'll see you when I can.
Thank you.
I'll see you next Wednesday if I don't see you before then.
Okay, great.
Okay, take
Thank you,
care.
Daniel.
Namaste.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.